I'm going to get started. As I said, I still see people joining, but we wanted to get started. And then this, as I said, this is being recorded and we will send it out to those people who registered for this evening. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Christina Hildebrand. I'm the founder and president of A Voice for Choice Advocacy. And about 2 years ago, maybe a little less, we started a project from A Voice for Choice Advocacy called Stand Up California. And we launched it as an email group list and sort of a count on by county. And I had high hopes for it. And then 2021, 22, specifically 2022 last year, legislation hit and we got buried in that. And so, and I also didn't have the right person to run it. So Karen, I'm a big believer in people come into your life for a reason. And I've known Karen for a long time, but she was moving on from her last position. And so I offered her to take this over because she's been doing this for another organization or similar things and did an amazing job there. And so we hired Karen in December, and this has become her sort of project, and she is our grassroots community outreach director. So Karen is here, Karen Emigun. I don't know, Karen, if you want to say anything, introducing yourself.
I think you did a great job, but hi everyone, I'm Karen, and it's just a pleasure to have all of you guys here tonight. And we have a great event and presentation for you guys, and I'm just excited to get Stand Up California going and to activate all of you guys together to really make a difference for our state. So thank you for being here.
So we're going to go through introductions. We already did those. For those of you who are joining, you're welcome to put your name and where you're from and sort of what brought you here in the chat, if you'd like. And so other people can see where you're from. What we're going to go through is sort of the mission of Stand Up California and what we are looking to help you get out of it. And then we're going to go through the school boards, Board of Supervisors, legislation, legislature, Q&A, and then we're going to go into breakout sessions. And those breakout sessions really are, I know I always, whenever I'm on a Zoom and somebody goes, you're going to go into breakout sessions, I completely go, okay, now I'm going to leave them. Now I'm going to leave the room because I don't want to do that. But what we really want, and you'll get this in our mission, which I'm going to jump to, is what we really want is for the people in your area to come together and for you to know those other people that are in your area, and to, you know, when you're there in numbers and you're going to meetings in numbers, or you've at least got, you know, people on the ground, it's not just you there. And that's the purpose of the breakout room. It's really so that you can get to know the other people in your area. So don't run away before the breakout room. So Stand Up California, as I mentioned, I started it 2 odd years ago, and our mission is still the same as that time, and that is to connect activists on a county level to work together to ensure the restoration of our rights as outlined in the U.S. Constitution, the U.S. Bill of Rights, and the California Constitution, and the prevention of mandates for government assistance, education, or to participate in society. We also want to help educate local and state officials, County Board of Supervisors, school boards, city councils, as well as the California State Assembly members and senators by providing activists succinct, well-researched materials and talking points, as well as a centralized site for local activists to network and support each other. And our tagline is nothing will change until we stand up California. And so those are our goals. They're kind of lofty goals, but we truly believe with your help that we'll get there. I'm going to hand it over to Karen to talk about, as I mentioned, we're going to go through school board, Board of Supervisors, and the legislature, and why each of those, what they are, sort of the basics of what they are, and why they're important, and why we're focusing on these groups rather than or these pieces of the government rather than others. We will not be talking about the federal government or other ones, and so I'm going to hand it over to Karen to talk about the school board and the Board of Supervisors.
Hi again. So let's talk about impacting our school board. So what is the school board? The school board members are locally elected public officials entrusted with governing a community's public school. And we've seen a lot of parents, be very outspoken about the issues that they're seeing. The role of the school board and the school board members is to ensure that school districts are responsive to the values, beliefs, and priorities of their communities. And just a little side note, feel free to take notes, but like Christina said, we will be sending you the recording and the copy of the presentation slides. Something that is really important is that your school board is the one that hires the superintendent and the staff. So what are the duties of the school board members? The school board adopts rules and policies, which are called board policies, that govern school employees and students. The school board must ensure that its board policies do not conflict with the law or with rules adopted by the California Department of Education. And so what is step one of getting involved with our school board? We would recommend to look at your school board agendas. Each school board has the agenda up on their website. This is the LAUSD as an example. But the school board agendas can be found on the website, like I said, and they are posted 72 hours before the meeting. This is a great way of finding out what issues they're going to be talking about, or if you have curiosity about what they are discussing, the agenda is a great way to start.
And I just want to comment here. One of the things, so my children, for example, go to private school. Many other people's these days are homeschooled. People would say to me, well, why would I go to the school board meeting if my children don't go to the public school or the local public school? And the key piece here, and this became especially true with COVID, is that many of the private schools and other sort of city entities or school type children's after school activities, those type of things, we're taking what the public schools were doing and we're mirroring that in those other entities. And that became much more so during COVID. So it used to be prior to COVID that private schools sort of did their own thing, didn't really follow the public school. That's part of why you send your child to a private school, because each private school is different. But during COVID, especially for public health, they were very much following the direction of the public schools. And so that's one place that even if you don't have children at public school, our recommendation is to go to your public school meetings. Now, it's better if there are people that have children in the school, because usually, if you give public comment, they listen more to people that are actually in the school district. But it is important even if you don't have children in the public school district, because they are shaping the way children are learning, the way the public health in the schools and that type of thing. So sorry for interrupting you, Karen.
Great point. That was a really great point. And just some highlights on creating a difference by attending a meeting. Like Christina said, you build accountability, so it encourages responsibility. Positive changes can happen when parents hold their school board members accountable. Your presence alone can remind them of who they represent. By attending these meetings, you'll be better equipped to discuss school issues and make your voice heard. Having a voice matters. Don't forget that you can speak up during the public comment period, like Christina said. Usually it's about 3 minutes. When you regularly attend school board meetings, you'll have a better idea of what discussions are on the table and what decisions are being made for your child. At these meetings, you get to connect a face to the name and see how your school board members' ethics play out as they navigate these meetings. You'll see firsthand how they make use of their vote on issues that matter. And when you are involved in your local school board meetings, you play a part in the school's trajectory. This in turn impacts the future of your community. And some issues become so big that parents have created petitions, written letters to the local newspaper editor, or rallied around with other parents to speak up at public meetings. By being informed and keeping others accountable through proper means, you can change your school's future.
Oops, sorry.
And like Christina said, also another great point that we encourage is to build your community through attending your school board meetings. You are not alone. So if you are a parent who has children in the public school or in private school, or you want to be a community member attending these school board meetings, a great thing is to start connecting with those parents who also have the same concerns as you do, and just start gathering together before the meetings and going through the agendas, knowing who's going to speak on what. But this is very important to show that you're more than just one parent that's concerned, and also so that you don't feel alone and overwhelmed going to the school board meetings.
And I think one other thing to say here is that, and it kind of says it here, but it doesn't say it outright, is very often when you go to these meetings, and doesn't need to just be a school board meeting, it also applies to the Board of Supervisors, to your legislature meetings, if they have town halls, that type of thing. Very often there are other people who are thinking the same way as you, that have the same concerns of you, and it just allows you to network that. So definitely, if you're coming up and giving public comment on a certain agenda item, and there are 5 other parents there that you don't know that are also speaking to the same point as you, make sure you go up to them afterwards and introduce yourself and build network and build that community, because you never know when it can help you. Right, on to Board of Supervisors.
We're moving on to Board of Supervisors. And if you have any questions, make sure you jot them down or just keep them in your head, because we will have a Q&A section at the end with Christina, and you can go ahead and ask those questions or type them into the chat. So Board of Supervisors, who are the Board of Supervisors? A Board of Supervisor is a governmental body that oversees the operation of county government. And importantly, the Board of Supervisors hire and fire county public health officers. And I smile this big because I live in LA County, and our public health officer is just great. And what are their roles? So what are the roles of the Board of Supervisors? Through government code, we are required that each county have a Board of Supervisors consisting of 5 members. They're similar to the City Council. A Board of Supervisors has legislative, executive, and quasi-judicial powers. The Board of Supervisors oversees most county departments and programs and annually approves their budgets, supervises the official conduct of county officers and employees, controls all county property, and appropriates and sends money on programs that meet county residents' needs. So how can you make a difference with your Board of Supervisors? Just like the school board, going through the agendas is very important, and attending the meetings. So the Board of Supervisors conduct regular meetings on Tuesdays. Sessions usually address regular budget matters, policy issues, and intergovernmental and legislative matters. By law, the agenda should include the time and location of the meeting. The clerk should post an agenda 72 hours before a regular meeting. The agenda should consist of a brief statement of each item to be considered by the Board of Supervisors, and agendas are posted on the County Board of Supervisors website. Something that I will be doing is at the end, you'll have a QR code to follow our new Stand Up California Instagram, and I will be going through the Board of Supervisors agendas and posting any highlights that need to be posted on that website until we have our county leads, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But just so that if you are interested, this is what you're interested in, you'll have access to those Board of Supervisor agendas, and just a reminder that a meeting is coming up.
So those are the QR codes.
Yes.
For each of the 5 counties that we're doing. I should have started this off by saying, and we'll get into it a little bit more in the breakout sessions and towards the end, but Stand Up California, so we have 52 counties in California, and each county has a Stand Up California email group, and will ultimately have a Stand Up California Instagram. these 5, Los Angeles, Alameda, Santa Clara, Orange County, and San Bernardino, currently have that, and we're kind of running them as the pilot project. So we can get those up and running, and then do the same for the other 47 counties in California. We wanted to kind of bite off a little bit and then go the rest, although we chose the biggest counties here to go with. So yeah, but if you're in any of those other counties, we will get there very quickly. So don't feel like you're left out, or that we're not addressing you right now.
And just if you could go back really quick, if you don't know what a QR code, this is the great thing about technology. All you have to do is grab your smartphone, click on the camera icon, and point it at your square. So Los Angeles, point it at there, and your camera a little link will pop up. All you have to do is click it, and then it'll take you to your county's Board of Supervisor agenda. So there are 3 ways to make your voices heard to your Board of Supervisors. The first one is mail. You can send a letter or a comment to your Board of Supervisors. You will find their address on your county's Board of Supervisors website. You can email them. Each of the county Board of Supervisors, they have their own district emails, and you can also find this on your county's Board of Supervisors website, or by phone. You can find a main phone number for your county's Board of Supervisors, or you can call in during a regular meeting to make a public comment. And most Board of Supervisors websites, they have a step-by-step on how to make a public comment during a regular agenda session for a specific item. Again, this is pulled from the LA County Board of Supervisors, but it breaks it down 1, 2, 3, and all you have to do is follow that to make a public comment. Super easy. I'm not going to go through this very overwhelming slide, but I took this from the Orange County Board of Supervisors website. And if you're like me, I need to know the directions, what the building looks like, what I should expect. That's just the way I process things. Orange County has a step-by-step of what to expect. And I was just so blown away that I had to put this on here. But, you know, it walks you through directions. They do have accommodations. If you need them, you can call in to request how to make a comment. All of the great stuff is on here. So again, I'm not going to go through this whole slide, but you will have a copy of this when we send the slides out.
Yeah, and I would say one thing, so as Karen mentioned earlier, for the school board and the Board of Supervisors, usually the time limit is 3 minutes. And that's a pretty good, it's a short amount of time, but it's actually a pretty good amount of time to get sort of your main point across. If you've got multiple people there, my recommendation is, you know, make sure you have 1 point per person and that you're not repeating steps or repeating comments. The other thing that I would say is usually if you're there in person, you need to fill out some form of request form to give public comment. Just make sure that you know what the protocol is. And right now, I believe most of them still have maybe Zoom in and phone public comment, but just make sure that's changing now that we've come out of COVID a little bit. Some counties have come out of it more than others. But now that we're coming out of that, that may be changing. It used to be many of them were in person only, or you could call in to make a comment, but they didn't have Zoom meetings, they didn't have live streaming. So COVID has changed that a little bit, and that's not consistent county by county, I don't believe. There was one other thing that I was going to say. And when you're giving comment, there is always a public comment period where you can comment on absolutely anything you want that is not on the agenda. If you want to comment on something on the agenda, then they usually take public comment either before or after that agenda item has been brought forward. It's usually it's in the middle or at the end of it. And so you want to just make sure that you're giving public comment for the correct correct thing. The other thing that I've noticed, for example, I think it's LAUSD, they have a certain number of speaker slots. So they only allow, let's say, 3 or 4 people to speak on each agenda item, and you have to sign up in advance for those. And so just things like that, just once you get into your own county and your own school board, you'll get the nuances of how your school board and how your board of supervisors works, but it's not always consistent from one county to the next county.
And Glenn just added here in the chat, Alameda County restricts speaking time to 2 minutes. So if you're in a county where you have 2 minutes, go ahead and drop it in the chat as well, so that we know, if your county is allowing 2 minutes or 3 minutes. This slide is so attending your board of supervisors public comment tips. So this slide is tips on how to address your board of supervisors. You want to introduce yourself, quickly greet the board, state your name, the relationship you have with the board of supervisors. For example, if you're a parent, a teacher, a student, or just a resident of the community, state your reason and purpose for speaking, give detail to express and further explain your reasons for speaking. Like Christina said, if you're there with somebody else, it's great if you guys split the topics so that everybody gets to speak on a different topic and it's not the same thing repeated. And then of course you want to end with a conclusion and by thanking the board for allowing us to speak during the public comment section. So now we're going to get into Board of Supervisor elections really quickly. And this is very important because if you guys remember in the first slide, the Board of Supervisors are the ones who hire the public health officer. Members are elected by voters in their respective districts and are limited to 3 4-year terms. A board member must be a registered voter. A board member must be a registered voter of and reside in the district from which the member is elected. And if you don't know your board member or what district you're in, you can go ahead and go on your County Board of Supervisor website to get that information. And these are just some tips. So get to know who your Board of Supervisors are, know their history on what issues they support, know when they are up for re-election, and if they need to be voted out. So if they're not representing you, your values, your community, you may consider getting involved and volunteer during the election season to help inform your community about the right candidate for the Board of Supervisors.
And I would say, we've just had the elections, so the next elections are usually in 2 years' time. But I would say, one of the things with the Board of Supervisors being the one that has the health officer, the county public health officer under their jurisdiction, and they hire and fire them. During COVID, we very much saw boards of supervisors and county health officers acting very, very differently in different counties. So as Karen said, LA County and Alameda County and San Francisco, the Bay Area, acted very, very differently from even Sacramento, Orange County. Once you got up into Placer County, El Dorado County, it looked very, very different from what it was in at least my area. So I'm going to talk about California legislation and the legislature a bit. So as I said, the 3 areas that we think are really, really important for people to advocate on a grassroots level is the school boards, the Board of Supervisors, and the California legislature. So the California legislature is your state legislators who go to Sacramento every week. And we're not going to talk about congressional Congress or the House of Representatives. They go to Washington, D.C. They take care of federal bills and that type of thing. We're really looking at our state. We're looking at California. A Voice for Choice Advocacy has had hundreds of meetings with legislators and staffers. We go up to the Capitol. Actually, Karen and I are in Sacramento right now. And we go and we talk to legislators and their staffers in Sacramento. One thing that we're looking for, and that's where we're asking for your support in doing this, is to have local grassroots activists, advocates in the counties and in the legislative districts going to meet with legislators there. you're the people that vote these people into office. And so they are listening to their constituents. They can listen to me and Karen and Leah, our legislative director, all they want. But realistically, they're supposed to serve their constituents. And if there are constituent issues, those are the ones that they're bringing to Sacramento. So just some background on A Voice for Choice Advocacy. Most people know this, but we're one of only 2 501c4 nonprofits in California focused on health and medical freedom. Unlike, we do have a 501c3, which is A Voice for Choice, but unlike a 501c3 nonprofit, they have to limit their time lobbying to a maximum of 20% of their efforts, whereas a 501c4 can spend 100% of our time lobbying. No other organization in California has the legislative experience that we do or the expertise, and we continue to be in the Capitol on a regular basis, both in years where we have bad bills and there's a lot of activism, as well as hopefully this year where we have some good bills and there is less activism, but we are here. A Voice for Choice Advocacy is not going away, and we're really active. So I'm going to look a little bit about our background, both A Voice for Choice Advocacy, but specifically in California that pertains to the vaccine issue. A lot of people that are coming here for Stand Up California may not be here just because of the vaccine issue. You may be here because of medical freedom, because of COVID, because of different issues with your schools, what your kids are being taught, all those things. But A Voice for Choice Advocacy was created initially because of a bill that started in 2015, but it actually had its roots in 2012. So in 2012, I was actually then Assembly Member Pan's first bill was AB 2109. Senator Pan, thankfully, is no longer in the legislature. He termed out this year or last year. So we were very happy with that. We don't have to deal with him anymore. But he put forward a bill that basically required, to give some background, in California prior to 2015, in order for your children to go to school, they had to be vaccinated, but there was an option of a personal belief exemption or a medical exemption. A personal belief exemption just stated that you had beliefs against the vaccine, you didn't have to explain them in any way. So in 2012, he put forward a bill that required, if you had a personal belief exemption, you to get a signature from a healthcare professional on a form designed by the state. So it was making it harder to get a personal belief exemption. Before that, you just signed the back of the blue vaccine card saying that your beliefs went against giving vaccinations to your child, one or more vaccinations to your child. That was the precursor for SB 277, which was introduced in 2015, and that's where A Voice for Choice Advocacy got its start. That bill eliminated the personal belief exemption completely, and it made medical exemptions the only exemption that you could have in order to get your child into school. Those medical exemptions, the wording of that medical exemption in the statute, allowed for a broad medical exemption that included family history, genetics, all those types. It was basically at the discretion of the doctor. Well, at that point, it also, and in doing so, it required children to be up to date the minute they got to school. So when you have a personal belief exemption, parents can take vaccines at their own pace. They can select which vaccines they want to do when, those types of things. What SB 277 now required was basically when you entered school, when you entered kindergarten or transitional kindergarten, you had to be completely up to date with all the required vaccines. The personal belief exemption also didn't seem to understand that there were a number of parents who filed personal belief exemptions who really had medical conditions for that they couldn't get vaccinated. And it really was, I didn't mention this, but there were only 2.7% of children in California that had a personal belief exemption. So 7.3% were they weren't necessarily fully vaccinated, but they were either fully vaccinated or on their way to being vaccinated. As actually, I think 91% were 100% vaccinated. So they were going after this very, very small number. And many of those people who had a personal belief exemption were actually people who had children who had their vaccine, who had been injured by vaccines. What we found was basically when the personal belief exemption was taken away, you had to get a medical exemption. In that time, there were many doctors that would not give medical exemptions, and there was a handful of doctors who would give the medical exemptions based on family history, based on genetics, based on previous vaccine injury. And they gave them, for example, they gave lifetime permanent vaccine exemptions, and they also gave them, for example, if your child had a injury from the MMR, they were giving them for Tdap and other vaccines. So in 2019, Senator Ban came back and he put forward SB 276. SB 276 was introduced because 0.7% of people had gotten medical exemptions. So this is, it was a very, very small number at that time. And what he was saying was basically they were all fake, that none of those should have gotten medical exemptions. And I'm not going to go through all of this in detail, but basically he tightened up, or the legislature tightened up the medical exemption, that basically there was no way to get a medical exemption. Today in California, it is incredibly hard to get a medical exemption because, number one, all the doctors that wrote medical exemptions have been witch hunted and disciplined, and so they can't give medical exemptions, or they're scared to do so. The other piece of it was it changed the definition to be that you had to have a precaution or contraindication to a vaccine, and if you had a reaction to one vaccine, that was the only vaccine that you could opt out of. The rest of the vaccines you could get. And so this made the medical exemption extremely limited. And it means that very, very few children in school now have medical exemptions because they're just so hard to get. And I will say, I've even seen people where doctors have been willing to give a medical exemption. And the minute that medical exemption goes into the CARE ME database, CDPH, the public health department, comes back and revokes it and says, this isn't good enough. You don't have a good enough reason for it. So it is very, very hard. And A Voice for Choice Advocacy has been fighting all these bills, but we've also been looking at different bills that we put forward. So, for example, in 2020, we put forward a bill that, as of this January, requires the labeling of menstrual products, the ingredients of menstrual products. So things like that we put forward in order to have a good relationship, a positive relationship with legislators. So in 2022, we had 10 bad bills. 4 of them ended up passing. The other 6 we were able to stop, either because well, actually, in all cases, the legislators pulled the bills. 5 of those were pulled early on before they even went anywhere. We had one SB 866 that went pretty much all the way, but got stopped at the very end. So the 4 bad bills that did pass were SB 1479, which is a COVID testing plan for schools. This really doesn't mean anything right now, because CDPH is not requiring testing. COVID testing in schools, but they do have to have on their website, they do have to have a link to the CDPH requirements for testing for schools, whatever that plan is. Our concern with this bill is that it is a precursor for other testing. So if they come out with testing for flu or RSV or who knows what else, that they would now be able to put that in place because they had this COVID testing plan. SB 1419 was a bill that actually was a great bill, except for one line of it, and it required medical privacy, a lot of medical privacy. The one line that we did not like about it was had to do with minor consent laws. So in California, there are quite a few laws that allow children 12 plus to consent to various treatments, such as mental health treatment, abortions, drug and alcohol treatment, those types of things. And this basically locked out the parents from seeing any medical documentation from those treatments that they had consented, that the 12-year-old plus minors had consented to. And so we asked for amendments to take that out. We're trying to get that bill amended this year and changed this year to have that have that, at least in emergency, to have parents have access to those medical records. AB 1797 had to do with our immunization registry here in California, the California Immunization Registry, and it requires every healthcare provider to put every vaccine that is given in California into that database. We are the only state that doesn't have an opt-in or an opt-out of that registry. You can lock it so that schools and third parties can't access it, but there is no way of removing your data from that. Just to note, it's only vaccinations given in California from now on, but it doesn't mean to say if you had vaccinations previously in California, given in California, that those may not be uploaded. And also if, for example, your child has a vaccine record from somewhere else, that those vaccines wouldn't get uploaded into the registry. That sort of is a little bit of a gray area. We don't really know how much they're going to backfill it and fill it up, but the goal there is to get every vaccine in there given. And I will say, yes, if they know who's got the vaccine, they also know who hasn't got the vaccine. And then the last one was AB 2098, which was the physician misinformation bill. This was actually great news this week. There was a preliminary injunction against this bill. And the key part of it that we had issue with was the statement that misinformation was the dissemination of information that goes against standard of care and contemporary scientific consensus. And it was specific to COVID. And when you get to contemporary scientific consensus, if anyone can tell me what that is for COVID, good on you, but it's not there. But as I said, that one was stopped in court. It has a good chance of being completely stopped in court. It was just a preliminary injunction. As I mentioned, a Voice for Choice Advocacy, I forgot I had this slide in here. We did have in 2020 a win with AB 1989, the Menstrual Product Right to Know Act, and that we take bills that are positive, proactive legislation. So I considered what we had last year reactive legislation. So it's where we're reacting, where legislators put bills forward and we're saying no or saying yes sometimes too, but we're reacting to them, usually on a negative side of things. What a Voice for Choice Advocacy looks to do every year is to have bills that are authored by the legislator that we can build relationships and have positive communication. So I call that proactive legislation. And we do that, as I said, to build relationships. I'm going to quickly go over the legislative process. This is a very simplified version of this, but basically you have a bill idea. California has the most number of bills that get authored every year because we have the most number of bills allowed per legislature. So we have 120 legislators, and they each have somewhere between 20 and 25 to 30 bills a year that they put forward. So that's 25 to 30 different pieces of our statute that they want to change or they want to add to. So our statute is humongous because we have so much legislation. Just as and our legislators are in working from December until September. So 10 months of the year, they're a working legislature. When I started doing this, what surprised me when I talked to people in other states was how limited their legislature was. So for example, Texas, I think, has a 3-month legislative session every other year. And so what they can get done in those 3 months is a lot less than our legislature can get done, both on a positive and a negative side. But I see it from the negative side. I think we have too many laws in California, too many bills coming forward. But to go through the legislative process, a bill idea can come from the legislature. It can come from one of their constituents. Many legislatures in the December, beginning of January timeframe get have a thing called like tell me a bill or give me suggestions for a bill. And so they are and so you can submit bills, constituents. And interestingly, in Massachusetts, I've recently found out that in Massachusetts, any individual can bring a bill forward and it has to at least get one hearing in the Massachusetts legislature. So, every state is different. I'm talking about California. So you have your bill idea. You need to find an author for the bill idea. So either a senator or an assembly member has to author the bill. That means they have to take it on and say, yep, I'm going to take this bill forward this year. To get bills authored is incredibly hard for individuals or organizations that are not huge organizations that have a lot of clout. So for example, for the California Medical Association or the California Teachers Association or the Prison Guards Association, for them to get bills authored, not that hard. For a Voice for Choice Advocacy or similar organizations, it's much harder because and for constituents, if it's a constituent issue, so if there are many constituents in your district that are having the same issue, then it's slightly easier because the legislature represents that constituency. If you get your bill authored, then it goes through the legislative process, and it starts on one side of the legislature, so either in the Assembly or the Senate, depending on which legislature, which type of legislature is authoring the bill. It goes to the Rules Committee, where it's assigned to policy committees. Policy committees are committees that are specific to the area or the issue that is being heard. The bills are being heard there. So there's the Health Committee, there's the Education Committee, there's Business and Professions, Judiciary. So if the bill relates to any of those areas, it will be brought forward to that policy committee. It gets voted through the policy committee or doesn't get voted through the policy committee. If it's a bill that the policy committee chair doesn't want to hear, doesn't even need to be brought before the committee, and that's for both the Assembly and the Senate. If it makes it through the committee by a majority vote, most a majority vote, if it's a urgent bill, it may have to have 2/3 vote. But if it gets through that, it then goes to the floor of that house. So if a senator introduced it, it would go to the Senate floor. If an assembly member introduced it, it would go to the assembly floor. Gets voted on there, again, needs a majority vote. I should take a step back and say, here in California, we have a supermajority Democrat legislature, which means that we have at least 2/3 Democrats in our legislature, both in the Senate and the Assembly. So nothing goes through either house without Democrat votes on it. Our Republicans, they're wonderful people, but they only have 1/3 of the votes. They need to get at least, the other, to get above 50%, that extra 20% from the Democrats. So there really needs to be bipartisan agreement on a bill that a Republican brings forward. On a Democrat bill, no worries, most of them pass because they have a majority, a supermajority. If the bill then goes, has, one of the policy committees I didn't mention is the Appropriations Committee, which is the fiscal committee. So sometimes bills get stopped there because they have too much budget associated with them. This year we're in a negative budget situation, and so they're looking very carefully at how much bills are going to cost, but that may also be another place that it gets stopped. But if it passes through the first house, it then goes to the other side and goes through that whole process again on either the Senate or the Assembly, switched over. And then if it makes it through all of those, if it's been edited, it has to go back to the original house, and then it gets to the governor's desk. The governor has 12 days. If it's before September or middle of August, the governor has 12 days to sign a bill. If it gets to him the last 2 weeks of August, or in the last 2 weeks of August, which is when most bills get to him, then he has the month of September in order to sign that bill. And if he signs it, it becomes law. If he doesn't sign it and he vetoes it, it goes back to the legislature, and it can, if they have a 2/3 vote on it, it can be put into law. That, in all my time, I have never seen a bill that's been vetoed and then voted on by the legislature. Usually legislators don't want to do that to the governor. They don't want to piss the governor off. And so they just bring it back the next year with whatever edits are required to get it through the next year. There are many dates. Again, I'm not going to go through all these. There are many dates that are important in the legislative process. As I said, it does start in December and it ends in September. So it's a very long process. They usually have the whole month of July off, somewhere between 1st and sort of 3rd, 4th, somewhere around there. But they usually have the whole month of July off, which gives us a break because we need it by then. But for example, one of the key pieces of information or key dates that's coming up is February 17th, when which is the last day for bills to be introduced. And so during this time, we have our ledger director and I are going through, mostly our ledger director, I will say, are going through all the bills that are being introduced and to see which ones we're going to support, which ones we're going to oppose, which ones we're going to watch. And usually by the end of February, last week in February, we will send out an email saying, okay, here are all the bills that are of concern. Here are the bills to support. And you really want to have both bills. We try and not oppose. We try and oppose as few bills as possible each year. Last year was an anomaly because there were so many bad bills, but usually there's 1 or 2 bills we oppose. We usually try to find 5, 6, 7 bills that we support so that we can have those positive conversations, because we don't want to go into legislature offices and just complain and complain and complain. We want to have some positive and support them in their legislation. So how will Stand Up California impact legislation? So really building those, similar to the Board of Supervisors and the school board, building those relationships. So building your relationship with your assembly member. You have 1 assembly member, 1 senator. Building your relationship with your senator and just staying connected with them. The key piece here is really building that relationship. So it's not going in there and just saying, I don't like what you're doing, or I like what you're doing, thanks, great, check mark, I've had a meeting with them, I'm all good. Really want to have a meeting that is building and building and building. I'll go back to my legislator when I started this in 2015, Senator Hill. He's in the Bay Area. And I went to he was great because he had coffee mornings. And so about once a month, he had a coffee morning at different local small scale coffee shop in the Bay, in our district. And I would go to every one of them. And, after 2 or 3 of them, he knew exactly who I was. I didn't have to say anything. I usually asked a question, but I didn't have to say anything. And afterwards he'd be like, oh, hi, Christina, how are you? And we had this relationship. Now, it doesn't mean to say that he voted exactly how I wanted him to vote. He didn't vote the way I wanted him to vote on SB 277, but we had this relationship that was a cordial, professional relationship that we both, we agreed to disagree. I shared with him information. I didn't come bombarding him with information the first, second, third time, and sort of we grew that relationship. And so I really, we were talking to one of our sort of strategists today and asking him, how do we generate these relationships? How do we get to ensure that not just us, but the people on the ground in these districts generate good relationships? And he said, you can come in with all the facts and all the data and everything and try and educate them. But realistically, the first thing you need to do is to actually have a relationship and find a connection with them, and do it out of kindness, not out of, I just need you to vote this way and I need to give you the information and you need to take this information in. It's not a one-stop process, and legislators are people, they got bombarded all day. If you know that they have 2 kids, or their kids go to your school, or they're, whatever profession they're in, that you can find some common ground that you can build that relationship on, and build it, as you said, out of kindness and coming from a good place and a kind place, rather than a bombarding and you need to stop this, I don't like what you're doing, all of that type of thing. Because it doesn't, the first reaction if somebody comes and forces themselves on you is to push back, and kind of get your defenses up. And you want to build that relationship. As I said, it's not a one-time thing. It's every single time that they have a town hall or a meeting or a public, go and clean up the beach, or those types of things. You want to build that relationship. Now, I will say there are some legislatures who, like Senator Pan, when people came to me and were just like, I'm in Senator Pan's district, I would be like, okay, let's find you a different district close by that you can go have a better chance of advocating for yourself and your family. And but I think, he's now gone, so thankfully I think we're out of that. There are a couple of others that I would still say are tougher legislators to have a good relationship with. But for the most part, I think especially because we have 37 new legislators this year, so there's a lot of opportunity to get in there and build that relationship. I'm going to go a little bit more quickly through this. As I mentioned, this assembly has 80 members. They're elected every 2 years, but pretty much once you get in, most assembly members get re-elected. They can stay up to 12 years. They basically can stay up to 12 years in both houses. So many people start off in the assembly, stay there for, let's say, 4 years, and then move to the Senate and have two election cycles in the Senate, or some of them stay in the assembly the whole time. You can find your assembly member with this QR code. Again, you're going to get this, but that's find your rep. You can find both your assembly member and your senator. As I said, you have one of each. State senators, there are 40 of them. I should say the assembly members oversee 500, between 480 and 500,000 people. Each state senator has 1 million constituents. So there are 40 of them in California. We have about 40 million people in California. Both assembly members and senators have a capital office, which is where I usually go and see them unless they're in my local area, and a district office. Some of them have more than one district office. So some of the assembly members and senators, their districts are very, very large. Especially once you get into the rural areas, and then they'll have 2 or 3 different district offices. That both are important, but when you are an individual, your district office is really there for the constituents. And so we really recommend, there may be times you come up to the Capitol for a hearing or for, something specific, but realistically, where you want to have those meetings is in the district. And the legislatures are in Sacramento from Monday to Thursday, and depending on where their office is, Thursday afternoon and all day Friday and the weekends, they're in their district. So if you want to have meetings with them, go find them on Fridays especially, but they also usually have their events on the weekends. As I mentioned, I sort of have gone over much of this, but you want to build a relationship, and this is probably the most important piece. And this is not just with your legislatures, but with your board of supervisors, with your school district, building that relationship so that when you do have an issue that is a difficult issue, either positive or negative, but something that is difficult to talk to, or politicize, that type of thing, that you have that you can have that conversation and that they trust you. There are legislatures and then there are staffers, and both of those are important. So it is important to have a relationship with your legislature, but their staff are also very important, and the staff are often the gatekeepers to the legislatures, and they have the ear of the legislature. So if you can't get in to meet with your legislator very often, which is usually the case with most legislatures, if you have a good relationship with the staffers will very often share your information. So it's very valuable to have both a relationship with the staff and with the legislators. The other thing is that staff stay around. So even when your legislature's term ends, or if they don't get reelected and a new legislator comes in, the staff often remains the same. What we found this year, as I said, there are 37 new members in the legislature. But when we call up the offices, we've seen that, this person went from this office to this office. Well, we had a great relationship with them in this office. Great, we'll have a good relationship. And it gives us the entry point to that new legislature. So otherwise we wouldn't necessarily be able to have that immediate relationship with that legislator. As I mentioned, we do recommend going at your local level. What you want to do is you want to sign up for for their newsletter. So on their website, there's usually a piece of a contact or a newsletter sign up. Definitely sign up for their newsletters, and you can see what they're passionate about. You can see when they've got their town halls, or as I said, cleaning up the beach, those types of things. I think I went through most of this. If you do have a meeting with them, you really want to investigate them, and we'll go into more detail on this as we go through Stand Up California, and we get this going. But you really want to find out what makes them tick. What are they passionate about? What do they really care about and what issues do they take bills forward on, and talk to them about those things. Find the common ground. Having information is key. Keep it simple. So, we always try and keep our fact sheets or our information to one page, and everybody's just like, oh my God, how do you cram everything on one page? But it's really, that's all they have the bandwidth for. If they want more information and more deep dive into something, they'll ask for it, and then you can give them more information on that deep dive. But for the most part, they're getting so much information that if you can fit it on one page, that's the key thing to do. Our calls to action, so CTA, for 2023, as I said, we're coming together as Stand Up California. We really want people to come together on the county level and to get community. So there are a number of people who I know emailed me and said, I signed up for it, but I'm not going to be able to come. Can you share this? So we are sharing this information. We are going to, so our Stand Up California and Voice for Choice Advocacy is committing to giving you the education and the empowerment to be able to do this yourselves, and also to be able to help us and give us feedback of what's happening on your local level, because we can't be in 52 counties at once. We can do so much, but we really need the people on the ground to also give us feedback of what's going on and how we can help you. So we see this as a two-way street. As we said, the school board, get familiarized with your school board agendas, see if there's something on the agenda that you want to speak about. I would recommend don't only go when there's negative stuff to speak about, go when there's positive stuff as well, so that the school board and the board of supervisors really can see who you are and what you stand for. Again, board of supervisors, same question: who's your board of supervisor? What are their main issues? Go to their meetings. California legislature, find your assembly member and your senator and make that connection, and then also stay connected with us. Go to our Instagram page, if you haven't signed up for the local county email group, then definitely do that. Do you want to talk about this, Karen?
Yes, so I'll talk about it really quickly. So send us your feedback. Like Christina said, I've added Christina's email here. So Christina@voiceforchoice.org if you don't already have it, and my email as well. So if you've gone to your school board meeting, your board of supervisors meeting, how did it go? Let us know how that went. And if you have footage, great footage that we can share on our social media, go ahead and send it to us as well. Christina mentioned to follow our Stand Up California Instagram page. So if you scan that barcode, and you'll get to know me that I love QR codes, it's just my favorite. If you just go ahead and open up your camera, point it at the QR code, it'll take you to the Instagram page. Join our newsletter. So like Christina said, you can go to standupcalifornia.com, and it'll give you the option to sign up for a newsletter. And in 2023, our vision is to expand our network of county advocates who are looking to be part of the solutions that will lead to change in our counties. Stay tuned for the announcements of our lobby town halls with Christina, and the opportunity to join us in Sacramento and locally to connect with our assembly members and senators.
All right. I think we gave 15 minutes, but this is the place. If you have any questions, you can either put them in the chat, or you can just raise your hand. For those of you who don't know how to raise your hand, it's somewhere on the little bar on the bottom. Feel free to raise your hand if you have any questions on any of what we've talked about. So Vivian.
Hi, my question was with regard to AB 2098, and I wasn't sure what exactly you said may be the next steps, and what could happen after this injunction.
Yeah. I can address that. So the law went into effect January 1st, which means that it is in our statute because the governor signed it. there were 4 lawsuits. One of them was dismissed. It was dismissed it was federal court, and it was dismissed. There were 2 lawsuits that were heard on January 23rd. They were what's called enjoined, which means the judge, basically, they were both going before the same judge, and so the judge put them together. And then there's a 4th lawsuit that I think is being heard in the next week or 2. And the 2 that were enjoined, they went before the judge for oral argument on the 23rd, and the judge put forward his order that he granted them the preliminary injunction. So what that means is basically AB 2098 right now is on hold. So that part of the statute cannot be implemented. It can't be implemented until throughout the whole time that the court case is being heard. And so that will probably it may take up to a year for that to happen. And during that time, nothing can happen with the statute that relates to AB 2098. If the results of that lawsuit are that, yes, still the judge believes that it is not constitutional, which is what he ruled on, then it would make that law obsolete. Now, the other side can appeal it and it can go higher up, but for the time being, while it's being heard through that whole time, it cannot be implemented. Having said that, AB 2098, the medical board actually already has the jurisdiction that if somebody was giving out misinformation and harming a patient, that they could they could discipline that doctor anyway. So, but the specifics of 2098 specific to COVID are not, they cannot be a doctor can't be disciplined for that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Does anyone else have any questions?
Christina, there was a good one in the chat that I grabbed earlier.
Yeah.
Evan Lowe has a meet and greet on Saturday. Any ideas on how to approach him and what legislation to ask him to sponsor?
Yes. So Evan Lowe was the person who authored the misinformation bill. So these are legislators, when you have a legislator like Scott Wiener or Buffy Wicks or Evan Lowe, that have put forward really bad legislation from our perspective, it's really hard to get over that. And I have the same, when I look at those legislators, I'm just like, I don't even want to talk to you because you don't think the same way I think. But I still will say I think Senator Pam was probably the only one that I would have pulled out and said, just don't go talk to him because it's just not worth it. The rest of them, I truly believe it's worth still building that relationship. Now, if you have an assembly member and a senator, and your senator, so if you're in Evan Lowe's office district, you probably have Senator Laird. Senator Laird is a much more even-keeled, I'm going to say, legislature, and has environmental policies that he's interested in, that type of thing. So if I had those 2 legislators, I'd probably spend more time in Senator Laird's town halls and district and that type of thing. No, same district, but than I would Evan Lowe. But I would say, go and just listen. Part of a significant part of advocating is to actually listen to these legislators, listen to their staff, listen to the people around you, and listen to what he has to say. What are his passion projects? What is he really interested in? And can you find any middle ground there? Or is there, something that you could give him? I'm going to put in big air quotes, advice on. In other words, something that has happened to your family that relates to what he is passionate about, either in a good way or a bad way. We try and keep as positive as possible up front, so you build the relationship on positivity rather than on negativity. But we really look at it from the perspective of who is this legislator and how can I build a relationship? You don't need to be best friends, but take it as a colleague at work. They're around, you have to deal with them. How do you at least have a collegial relationship with them to make it that that you can get somewhere and get something done? But listen to what he has to say. Ask some good questions, but it's one question. Some of these legislators also, I will say, so as I said, Jerry Hill in my district, he had coffee mornings. People showed up at the coffee place, got your coffee, free donut, and then you could ask him any question. Anybody could ask him any question, and it was open town hall. The San Francisco legislators, they do town halls. They have sometimes all three of them that sit in San Francisco, and they will put themselves up on the stage, have everyone else in the auditorium, and you have to write down the questions you have. And then they have basically a screener that only asks certain questions. So if you want a real question asked from our perspective, it usually doesn't even land on their, land to them. But I that's the place where it gets somewhat frustrating, because you can't actually have a conversation with them, or you can't ask them the questions that you want to ask them. So it really, again, it's legislature by legislature. I saw somebody else. Clayton, you had your hand up. Clayton, you need to unmute if you still have a question.
Am I unmuted for you?
Yes,
okay.
You are now. Yes. Now
good. You said the legislators in session from Monday through Thursday.
Yes.
When is it possible to attend their sessions?
So most of them are televised. So you don't actually have to come to Sacramento to watch them. The way the legislature works, so Monday morning, they travel to Sacramento from wherever they are, either by plane, train, automobile, whatever. Monday afternoon, usually around 1 or 2 o'clock, they have a floor session in the Senate and the Assembly, where all the legislators show up and they deal with whatever sometimes they pass bills, sometimes they pass resolutions, sometimes they just have conversations. I find there's a lot of fluff involved in that meeting very often. Then on Tuesday and Wednesday, they have, sometimes it's Monday afternoon, but usually Tuesday and Wednesday, they have the policy committee hearings. So the health committee, the education committee, the judiciary committee, all of those meet usually once a week. So with COVID, they went to once every 2-3 weeks, or whenever they had, a bunch of bills come together. I believe this year they're going back to a more regular schedule where they, depending on the committee, but most of the big committees are happen every week. And those again are televised. If you go to the Senate, if you search California Senate or California Assembly, the website will come up, and there's a media tab that you can drop down and you can watch those. It'll be interesting to see. So during COVID, pre-COVID, if you wanted to give a public comment at a hearing, you had to come to Sacramento and give that public comment in person. During COVID, they moved much of that online, and you could, or not online, but you could call in and you could get you could give public comment over the phone. I believe this year and towards the end of last year, they started doing this. They started going back to just being in person and giving public comment in person. One big thing with public comment in the legislature, which is different from the Board of Supervisors and the school board, is that there are usually 1 or 2 or 3 people that give the primary testimony, and those are people who are the sponsors of the bill or the key opposition, the lead opposition on a bill. But the rest of the public, all they can go up and say is their name, their affiliation, and where they're from. And that's all the public comment you can give. Again, different from other states. In for example, Colorado, each person can give a 3-minute public comment. And so, on bills where there are thousands of people, that takes a really, really long time. But here in California, you can only give your name, your affiliation, and whether you oppose or support the bill. So those happen on Tuesday, Wednesday, and then Thursday morning, they have another floor session. The entire Senate, the entire Assembly come together, and then they leave Sacramento on Thursday. They travel back to their district and then they're in their district Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or Thursday evening, Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
Now, do you need to get prior approval to sit in the chambers?
No, you do not. Nope. You can go and sit in, you can spend the whole day in the, or not the whole day, but the whole hearing, sitting in the audience of any committee meeting, and you can go into the assembly or the Senate main hall up in the gallery. You can go into those without any approval process. You do have to go through a metal detector as you enter the building, but other than that, you don't have to.
Oh, good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And there's another great question in the chat before we break out to our breakout session. Hi, Christina. This is from Teresa. Hi, Christina. I'm so happy to be here. LAUSD still requires parents to have the C-shot to be a parent volunteer at schools. I'm trying to help end this so that many wonderful families can volunteer. Do you have any information regarding this? Also, any additional information regarding C-shot past the 2023 date? Thank you so much for your support.
Yes, so there are some crazy school boards like LAUSD that still require, and there's one in San Mateo County as well, that still require the vaccine for parent volunteers, the COVID vaccine for parent volunteers. And they have every right to do that. Like I've gone through all of the policy committee, the policies from each of these school boards. They put the policy in place. They can determine who is a volunteer and what requirements they have for volunteers. For example, LAUSD also currently still has their teachers and their contractors that have to have the COVID vaccine. But the difference is if you're employed, you fall under the Civil Rights Act, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, and you have to be able to have a religious exemption. That is not the case for volunteers because you're not paid anything. So if you're compensated in any way, then you could argue a religious exemption. But because volunteers are not paid in any way, they can't argue that. I think at this point, I feel like some of these places are just, there are some colleges that are doing the same and requiring boosters. I think LAUSD requires one booster. I feel like they've just dug themselves so far in the ground, they can't pull themselves out of the ground at this point because they've been so adamant. And so I don't have any specifics. My recommendation is get as many parent volunteers, even if they've had the vaccine, to say, this is ridiculous at this point. Let other parents volunteer. Like, it doesn't matter whether you have the vaccine or not. But I think it's a numbers game. It's a can you get as many parent volunteers to be requesting this, and maybe have as many parent volunteers hold off, volunteering for the school. And if they have a shortage, maybe they'll come around. I really do hope. The governor said that, he is likely going to get rid of our state of emergency in February. Well, I personally will believe it when I see it, given the history. But if that happens, I feel like, so many of these COVID policies that are sort of lingering will hopefully go away because there won't be a state of emergency anymore. They can't really hang their hat on anything. As for July 2023, I think you're referring to the childhood vaccine, the requirement for COVID. If that happens, it would be CDPH putting it forward. And if CDPH puts it forward, they have to have a personal belief exemption for the COVID vaccine. So at the earliest that would go into play, if we don't see a bill this year, which I won't be completely 100%, but until sort of February, end of February. But I really feel strongly that there won't be a bill requiring children to get the COVID vaccine for school. In which case, if it then when it was brought forward next year, it wouldn't be going into effect until 2025. So I think we're off the hook on that. At most, we would have a personal belief, or at least we would have a personal belief exemption in July. Go ahead, Vivian.
I wonder if that also goes for, is it different for workplace mandates in California?
Yeah, so there are still, like, Google still is requiring all people that are in, if you want to come in person, you have to have a vaccination. Again, I think it's insane. But they seem to be moving forward with it. Again, I do think, it's interesting because, for example, when the state of emergency goes away, all of the executive orders that Newsom signed, including, for example, the healthcare workers. So currently healthcare workers are still required to get the vaccine in order to be in a healthcare setting. There's still a mask mandate in healthcare settings because of his executive orders. And so it's, that's where I see it. And I go, those executive orders, if there's no state of emergency, all of those executive orders he signed go away. And so I feel like that will be a turning point. Now, whether places like Google or any of the other companies that are requiring the vaccine to be there in person, whether they let it go, I don't know. To me, I don't understand why they still have the requirements in place now. But that's I clearly am not them.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. So Karen, I think we would like to go into breakout rooms